that one. That one doesn't move.
It's close enough. All right, it's 3 o'clock. We'll get our regular Hutchinson Utilities meeting called to order. Before we get started, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared by any of the commissioners?
I have none.
None.
None. All right, we'll move on to item 2, approve the consent agenda, approve minutes, and the ratified payment of bills. Was there anything in there that needed to be pulled out?
Not that I can see.
I didn't have any.
None.
None.
Make a motion to approve.
A second.
Motion by Don, second by Monty. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, item 3 is approve the financial statements. Guessing Jeremy?
Yeah, just a few things. Hope you guys had a chance to read through some of the notes or a few more things on there. We did kind of give you guys the year-end outstanding balances of delinquent accounts the past 30 days. At the end of here, so you can see, again, we're monitoring those things. Those things have been reported to some of the different legislative bodies as well, because they're getting a handle on these rearages. And as this pandemic continually moves on, they want to see how much bigger this problem's coming with customers not paying their bills and just disregarding disconnects. And obviously we'll talk a little bit about it as we get into the item down below with just the gas issues that happened this month too. It's just compounding the problem now. So just want to give you a little update kind of where we're at on our end. Again, it sounds like a big number, but when I listen to people talk about 30, 40 million and 100 million of arrearages, or 100,000 pales in comparison to that, although it's a sizable amount for us.
Jeremy, is that picking up momentum or slowing or in most recent months?
I'd say it's been fairly stable. I wouldn't say it's picking up or slowing down. The people that aren't paying still aren't paying. Most people are doing a good job of paying. The people aren't paying, where they're not paying, those are big balances. They're $2,000 to $3,000 now. For the most part, they just continually keep moving. Obviously, we've tried getting people to pay. I will say most people have done a really good job through UCAP and through some of the different subsidies that they're able to get in the budget plans. We've been able to capture about 80% of the arrearages through that way, just getting people to make the call or us calling on their behalf and working with those people either at the state level through their programs or through UCAP programs here and kind of walking them through those programs. So people have done a good job of going through this path, so we've been able to really significantly drop our arrearages from that regard. But the ones that just don't want help, they don't want to call, they're just going to wait until we shut them off. We get those comments of we won't do anything now until you guys start disconnecting us, and then we'll talk to you about a budget plan and things of that nature. And those are the balances that we just keep having that are on the books, even though we'll make concerted efforts every month, 2, 3 calls, working with these people. They're not going to do that. So until we really have a mechanism to really start going down that path and shutting people off again, those people just aren't going to come forward and look to pay down at least some of their balance. Now I will say, with all that being said, that's a small percentage of our customer base. So it's not a significant problem as far as a percentage of our customer base doing that, but we have them just like every other community has. Those customers just aren't going to be willing to do that, or they're going to wait for some subsidy coming down from the government to help cover those costs or whatever the case may be. So I would say it's fairly stable to answer your question. It's not, we're not gaining in arrearages, we're not really losing ground. It's just the same 0.5% of customers that just are allowing their balances to grow.
On the gas side, I'm guessing a little warmer January this year than last?
Yeah, has been warmer. Obviously usage is down a little bit. Also on the electric side, the one thing I just mentioned is we underestimated the transmission costs for February or for January. So when you look at the financial statements, the loss of 167, you can add about 52,000 of that. Our transmission came out at 146,000. We estimated 90,000. Two things for that. Obviously, the new rates are in effect. So they originally sent us the bill with the old rate, and we said, well, that doesn't look right. That looks like their old rate from last year. And so they sent us a revised invoice to all the people in the GRE zone with the new rate. So obviously the new rate's been in effect now for January. So that increased our transmission cost, and then also our demand was higher this January over last January. So we had a higher demand as an overall percentage of the overall zone. So we end up picking a little bit more transmission costs. And then obviously the other kind of smaller component is, as we continually depreciate assets, we get less and less credit back through revenue requirements. So all those things we end up playing into the transmission. But the 146,000 is right where I predicted our budget would be when we upped our budget for 2021 with the new rates. And so it's not out of line with where we'll end up at the end of the year. It was just we estimated below that. So we're really looking at about a 220 loss on the books for January. And another piece just to mention is the depreciation, as Jared mentioned in there, that will be above budget every year. When we originally put the 2021 budget together, we were just going to depreciate the units for 6 months, assuming we'd have the project finally completed, and we'd start depreciating it over 6 months. Well, we talked with the auditors. It's close enough that we can start depreciating a full year of it this year. I think we just have that $90,000, that 1% left, and so they said we must just start depreciating that and getting that. So you'll see that we'll be over budget on a monthly basis with just depreciating an additional 6 months. So otherwise, for the most part, things looked fairly consistent. Again, load was down a little bit, but not significantly. On the gas side, things were fairly consistent. Load was down, again, a warmer January, although we'll be making that up here moving forward. Fairly consistent in January month as well on that piece, so nothing out of the ordinary from that regard. Any questions on any of the financial stuff at this point? I'll get into more of the gas stuff later on.
Anybody care to make a motion?
Move to approve financials.
I'll second it.
Motion by Anthony, second by Bob. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Open forum, I don't see any guests. Item 5, communication. Mark, do you have anything for us today?
Yeah, actually, I do.
Excellent.
So something that the commission has talked about from time to time in the past is how to deal with the general manager's salary and the effect that the Minnesota governor's salary cap has on his ability to receive increases from the commission. Just by way of update, I guess I would let you know that there is a bill in the legislature right now that's made it through a couple of different committees that is proposing to do away with the governor's salary cap altogether. I think there's a companion bill on the Senate side. You may know more than I do, Monty, about this. But
I haven't seen that one, no.
I don't know if it's received any hearings on the Senate side yet or not. It looked like the most recent hearing happened on Monday and it passed out of that committee, and it sounds like most of the weight was actually being pulled by MMUA, and the state of Rochester apparently was there to testify as well about the effects that the governor's salary cap has had on that city's ability to retain employees. So I don't know if you had wanted to provide me with any feedback you might have with regard to that legislation. If you think that MMUA is fine with carrying the water on it, or if you had wanted to, I guess, express an opinion one way or the other, or just have me keep you updated or whatever. But I thought I would just let you know that there is some action in the legislature concerning that issue.
Yeah, I think at least an update, unless anybody else had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, at a minimum, an update. We started talking about the governor's salary cap and its impact on our, or conflict with our grid, I suppose, in hindsight, as you could probably call it that, after Jeremy's review in the end of 2019 and hit it in the end of 20. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on at the very minimum.
You know, and it probably deserves a little bit a closer look to see if it's just MMUA related or if there's other industries. You know, I know that the Educators Association did that run a long time ago, so it'd be interesting to see if there was others that were affected or might be involved in that as well.
Yeah, you know.
I'm not overly involved in St. Paul and watching bills and legislation and so on. What's the process it's started and it's had conversations and hearings, and what from there? How does that shake out?
Yep, so basically what's gonna happen is it starts at a very low general committee or subcommittee generally, gets passed out of that committee. There's usually some back and forth between, because some of the committee oversight overlaps each other. So generally there has to get shuttled between committees, and as it advances, you certainly hope that generally what happens is there's gonna be a companion bill in the other house of the legislature. And hopefully the bill is progressing in that side as well. Kind of the same thing, give and take, gets shuttled back and forth between committees, and as it advances, hopefully it gets enough votes in those committees to advance to a floor vote eventually, where many times it's packaged together with other legislation. And then after that, it's anyone's guess.
Okay.
Is there a typical time frame? When does the legislative session end?
I don't know when it ends this year, honestly.
I thought it was,
Yeah, they have to have stuff out of the committees by March 12th
Just gonna
this
say.
year. So,
And if it doesn't make it out of committees, then it doesn't hit the.
well, Mark is right, it depends on what is, well, let me back up, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I think they put that fence up around the Capitol to keep me out. I thought it was for security at first, but now I'm starting to take it personal. Having said that, Mark is right, it kind of depends on whether it gets lumped in with other things, and that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. It could be just collateral damage, it gets put in with something that's not going to make it all the way through. Or it could get put in with something that has a lot of support across both sides, House and Senate side. It will go through, and it could be one or the other. The thing I guess I would add on to what Mark said is, another element that makes a big difference too is what kind of support does it have? Who signed on, who's authoring it, who's carrying it? And that tends to either start off with one or two representatives or senators and stay that way, or it grows. And depending on what they are and how influential they are and what committees they're a part of, that makes a real big difference. It's a good question, Anthony. It could be it literally could be a 1-year process. It could be a 5-year process. I mean, sometimes it's tougher slogs than others, and it really is not necessary. You wish it would be debated on its own merit, but that's not the way it happens all the time.
Yeah,
Mark, did I miss something?
There's just a lot of horse trading at the end.
Absolutely.
To get stuff passed and
Yep.
give and take at the end. And
Yep.
So you'd said MMA or MMUA is carrying it right now, and
Yep.
you're asking if that was enough for us, or are you asking if there's more than we can do? Is there more we can
Well,
do?
yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that, on an individual basis, if you as a commission wanted me to contact our local legislators to voice support for the legislation, that's certainly something I would be happy to do. If it's something less than that, if it's a communication with the MMUA or the Minnesota League of Cities, kind of the same thing, voicing your support that, hey, we support their efforts in going forward with the bill.
Do you know if the league has a stance?
The league apparently also testified in support
Okay.
on, this is Wednesday, so on Monday at the last hearing.
Okay.
I think a letter to Senator Newman would be a good idea, personally, because he's from this area and he's familiar with our situation. So I think, I don't think that would hurt.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you contact MMUA and make sure that we're in the loop in the conversation, I think that's beneficial to us too.
Okay. Everyone else okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm okay with sending the letter.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Jeremy?
just been a lot of legislative stuff going on. Obviously, we're in the thick of things, both at the federal level and the state level. We did have our state legislative rally here last week and went through and met with some of the commissioners from the Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, Department of Labor. Talked with them about kind of where they see their initiatives going with Governor Waltz and some of the people in the House and the Senate side of things. The sense I really got from that is they're definitely going to continually look to push the renewables, making sure that we're moving more towards 80% renewable by 2050. There's a bill that's going to be pushed out there that's 100%, but I didn't get a real good sense from either the PUC or some of the people on the House or the Senate side that 100% is really realistic until you make some significant transmission investments in the MISO market, particularly the Midwest up here, to get to 100%. I think a lot of the feeling is we can get to 80% fairly cost effectively, but that last 20% you really have to displace some other generation. And the transmission just isn't there, isn't robust enough, not only in the MISO market, but some of the other markets that are around. So, but there definitely seems to be bipartisan support. Senator Senjum on the Senate side is really looking to carry moving towards more clean energy, carbon-free. The side of things, Representative Long, who's the DFLer out of Minneapolis, he's very much in kind of lockstep with Senator Senjum as far as some of that stuff goes. So I don't think it's a matter of if it's coming, I think it's just a matter of how quickly and what they decide the percentage of renewables and carbon-free emissions are. There was some, I would say, some debate back and forth on electric vehicles and how prevalent that's going to be in Minnesota. Obviously, they think the transportation sector is really the biggest emissions sector right now. It used to be the utilities, but the utilities have done a significant amount to reduce carbon emissions already. So now there's some focus being shifted on the transportation sector, which is the biggest emitting industry in the state right now. And so they're really going to be pushing EV vehicles, and manufacturers providing incentives to do some of those things. So those things are going on. They're trying to push a clean energy first bill, which is basically in all situations with integrated resource planning, which the ILUs have to do. If there's the ability to put in a renewable or clean energy source, that will be the preferred generation tool. They're also still talking about nuclear, as far as there's a moratorium on nuclear generation, although there are some people on both sides of the aisle that feel that if you're going to have clean energy, you got to keep generation from nuclear in the mix, particularly to get to 100%. So they're debating, obviously, back and forth on some of those things. There was some concern, significant concern, more so at the federal level, with FERC and some of the PUC oversight committees there, that moving to the renewable side of things, when a majority of solar panels, wind components come from some of our not so friendly allies overseas, when a lot of that's coming from overseas, particularly China, Iran, Iraq, some of those areas, and some of the raw minerals and resources needed to produce battery storage and solar panels and things. That we just don't have a lot of those raw minerals over here to do that. There's some concern about putting too much dependency on countries like China and things to provide us that supply chain, because if we don't stay friendly with them, they can cut those supply chains off, and then we're left without local things to do that. So talking about technology advancements and other ways to get to renewables without using those types of minerals is becoming a big concern for a lot of people. I don't know if you guys watched a little bit of Elon Musk. He basically said the biggest constraint right now for electric vehicles is there just isn't enough raw materials to produce the level of scaling up batteries, not only for the transportation sector, but for high storage. There just isn't enough mineral sources to do that. So until other technologies come along to make those things happen, that slows on the progress on that side. But renewables, that's a big push, but at both levels. So that piece is going on. We do have the federal Washington lobbying efforts coming up here March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So we're sitting on meetings to talk with some of our legislators out there on some of that. So that's going on. And then really the big topic over the last week and a half has really been the natural gas kind of debacle that happened in the cold weather down in the ERCOT and Oklahoma markets, and how it impacted gas supply in the MISO market and things of that nature. And I'll talk about that here when we get down there. But that's basically consumed about the last week and a half of meetings at the federal level, meetings with the PUC and investor-owned utilities to MMUA and municipal utilities, and there's just a lot of major issues going on right now. I'll touch a little bit on that later. But, so that's kind of the big hot topic right now. There's things going on, FERC investigations, and they're starting to look into manipulations of the markets and things of that nature. So there'll be a lot of conversation over the next year about the episode that happened here in the ERCOT market. So, but I'll touch on it a little bit later.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Next, item 6, policies. Looks like we're just to review them, no changes needed.
Correct.
7, unfinished business. I don't believe there's any of that. Item 8A is to review the 2020 annual distributed generation.
Yep, so every year, we're required by law to provide our board, or oversight board, just our cogeneration policies. These policies, I think we put in place about 2 years ago. They were standard cogeneration policies that utilities have to follow now to allow customers to put in cogenerated resources. So we have to report on that, and we're required to submit this information to our board. So this year, they have compiled the information as far as the number of systems within our distribution system, on our distribution grid, the size of those, and then just some other pertinent information. And then within that is our 2 policies that are on our website that, in perspective, customer that's looking to put up some type of solar or some other distributed generation has to follow. And those are, again, consistent state law kind of templates that we follow as we went through that whole meeting process with them to define documentation and the policies that utilities are going to use in the state of Minnesota. So it's just a kind of a review and for the board. You can see we have added a couple new ones since I think last year. System 5 and 6 are happened within the last 12 months. So we are adding some smaller scaled systems. Again, really the cutoff for the commission typically is anything under 40 kW where we don't have a choice. We have to allow those things on the system. Anything above 40, we can determine if we want those on the system or not and what the rate is that we're paying. Of course, we publish also our buyback rate. We're required to do that by law as well, and that's out on our website. So if the commission says, hey, we're okay having someone put in a system bigger than 40 kW system, here's the rate we're charging as we move forward. Now, what we've typically done here is we've had people size their arrays where they're using most of it if they can on site, so we're not typically buying a tremendous amount back, although we do have one customer that's kind of, I think where you're at now, has a 39 kW system on, 37, and it's for a while was just mainly used as storage, just very minimal output being consumed, so we were buying back quite a bit of power from that customer at the retail rate, or the published rate, which isn't retail, it's a rate between the retail rate and our wholesale rate that we're required to buy back. So, but generally speaking, most people are using most of their power on site and their size that way.
Any questions from the commission?
Yeah, Riley.
Care to make a motion?
There's no motion needed, it's just a review.
Oh, I'm sorry. Item 8B, approve requisition 8676 electric distribution coordination study.
So yeah, these next couple of items are, we talked a little bit about it during the budget process where we have to update some of our studies that we haven't done for a while. So this is one of those studies that needs to get done as we obviously have updated some of our infrastructure. We've changed out some of our substation areas. We're going to be revising plant number 2 substation with a different configuration there. Obviously our load has changed over the last decade and a half, and so this distribution study will help us make sure that we've got enough feeders in town, that they're appropriately sized for the voltage and the load on those, that if there's a feeder that's typically getting too much load, that we look to divert that to either a different feeder or add another feeder. So this type of study should be done at least every 5, I would say 10 years. 5 years if you're significantly growing load, where you have to just review those things. So this one would just be one of those studies where we're going to go back through and relook at our distribution system with some of the different things that we've done for improvements and things to make sure that we're set up the right way with loads and voltage and things of that nature.
Is there anything, so I understand revisiting the study and why you want to do it, is there anything, Jeremy, that you're aware of at this point that might be a problem or an outlier?
No, I don't think, there's nothing that Dan and I and Dave talked about that there's any real smoking gun or something that we think, hey, there's a major issue there. The piece that I think was important for those guys is because we are reconfiguring the substation up here with different technology, we've already reconfigured the substation downtown with a lower transformer They were making sure that the feeders and what's coming out of the substation as far as, the switches and capacitor banks and those types of things are sized appropriately so we're not losing power as well or excess energy. So that's one of the other things that we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're sizing our stuff appropriately where we're not oversizing things where we're losing energy, which is costing us money. So that's kind of the biggest thing. I mean, there's no, I wouldn't say there's any real major issue that we have, but it's just a good validation that what we have and how we're configured is what we need for how we're operating today and what things we've improved in our infrastructure on that. So some of that stuff will also help when they reconfigure the substation out here with the new transformers and the control panels. Same with one of these other ones that's on here later with McLeod substation where those capacitor banks are going in to make sure that the control switches, those things are reading synonymously and are synchronized with our RTU systems and our SCADA systems and some of that stuff. So that's what some of these other ones in here are, making sure that everything is synced up. Because we are moving, I know we've touched on it before, we're moving away from a lot of the mechanical stuff that we have to more of the electronic stuff. So as you see a lot of these RTUs being switched out and dollars in the budget for that, that's essentially what we're doing is we're moving from the 50-year-old technology to the electronic SCADA-driven systems. And so when you do those things and you're pairing up old equipment with new equipment, you got to make sure that those things still stay synchronized until you can transfer out and some of the old stuff. So some of these studies are a part of that review and analysis as well. So,
What's the timeline for completion?
I think all these they want to have completed for sure by this summer. This is the gist I got. Obviously, the capacitor bank one has to be timely with the installation of the capacitor banks. So that equipment has been sent out for purchase and procurement. As I talked to Dan the other day, they hadn't obviously received it in yet. It's still in kind of the manufacturing stage. But with the capacitor bank, we have to have that stuff identified, the synchronization plotted out with the switches and the RTUs as the capacitor banks are going in, so that when they're ready to do all that stuff, we're all coming in and doing a coordinated effort, because that substation's gonna be shut down, so they're gonna have to reroute the 110 line or the 115 line to other places until we get everything switched over and synced back up. So they're not gonna allow us to have that substation down very long, and obviously GRE is the one that controls that substation, so that we're working with them through this entire project. So that one will be important that one's done as timely as possible, so that we're mitigating any downtime on the transmission line. This one will go along. I think this one will start here fairly soon, and they'll start moving that one as quickly as they can. A lot of these, they don't take a tremendous amount of their time. It takes a lot of time on the staff side to provide them all the documentation, all of our electrical grid information, all of our diagrams and some of that stuff, and then it's just a lot of analysis and review and modeling. They have a lot of the modeling software systems that we don't have here at these companies, and so that's why you contract them out to do all the modeling and stuff for you. So, but they'll all be done, I would say, by the mid-year to fall. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one question. This is more for Mark, probably. Mark, this requisition and the two after are all to DGR Engineering.
Yep.
Is that an appropriate way to do it? Acceptable to you? So on?
Yep.
Okay.
Occasionally a question comes up about whether we have to bid it out or whatever.
Yep.
Professional services do not have to be bid.
Okay.
Just be strict negotiation or just no negotiation, actually.
Okay. Thank you. I'm good.
Would you care to make a motion?
Make a
Move
motion.
to approve requisition 8675.
I'll second.
Motion by
76.
Anthony, second by Monty.
Oh, hold on one second.
8676, Andy.
8676.
Yep.
All right, requisition 8676. Motion by Anthony, second by Monty. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 8C, approve requisition 8674, McLeod Substation RTU.
So as I kind of mentioned, this is going to be a project that dovetails on that whole capacitor bank project for those renewable energies in there. So we're going to hire these guys to come in and again synchronize our ILS RTU system with our new SCADA system. We're going to be doing all this, the RTU and relay switching and basically syncing that up for us as we move along. So Again, this one will be timely based on making sure that it falls in line with when these guys are ready to switch off the 115 line and get everything synchronized and it's rerouted back on. So still, I think that anticipation is by the end of the summer for that project. But obviously, we'll have to have our stuff ready to go before that gets finalized and before they get to that point where they're rerouting the transmission. So.
All right.
I'm good.
Everybody good?
Yeah. I'll make a motion to approve requisition 8674.
I'll second it.
All right, motion by Don, second by Bob, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 8D, approve requisition 8675, Plant 2 substation RTU and relays.
So this work will be specifically for the new transformers up here at Plant 2. Both of those are on site. We have both of the transformers here now. So it'll just be a matter of getting the study done, getting the schematics ready to go, and then they'll come out and hook up. We'll place those on the pad here this spring. They'll come out, we'll do some of the prep work, and then they'll come out and hook up the RTUs, go through the synchronization with the grid, work with GRE as far as synchronizing it on the transmission side of things. And then we'll have some kind of final things that we'll have to do with some final hookups and installations. But the main synchronization of those transformers and the protection systems on the back end of that, and the fault currents and those things that they'll model, they'll be doing those components, and then we'll finalize some of the hookups and things of that nature. That what I would anticipate will be by this summer as well. If we put the transformers on the pad here this spring, this study should be ready to go by then, and then when they get out here to do that hookup, they'll do that. Obviously, like we talked about in the past, with that substation, particularly as it gets hot and gets warm, we want to make sure that we've got the substation ready to go. So we're anticipating this to be done by the time the hot season rolls around, so that we're not having to push too much demand on a couple of our other substations. So we want to get that up and running and have that redundancy built in, and some of our feeders re-spread out to the different substations here by the summer. So I would anticipate down in the next 3 to 4 months as well. So at least with the study being done. So.
Great.
Yeah, I'm good.
Questions? Good?
Good.
Anybody care to make a motion?
We'll move to approve requisition 8675.
Motion.
I'll second that.
Motion by Anthony, second by Don. All those in favor say aye.
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 Alright.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 8E is to approve 3M's natural gas transportation and daily swing supply agreement.
So this is an annual contract with 3M that we have, and so we met with them last week to talk about the natural gas supply and the spikes in the spot markets, and we just, at the end of the conversation, we asked them where they were at signing this capacity agreement with us, and so they ended up getting it back to us. I think they had it signed for a couple of weeks, but just didn't reroute it to us, and so we wanted to obviously get it on the board's agenda to have it approved before our current contract expires with the capacity side of things and the commodity side. So they got it to us, and it's in the packet for you guys today to approve renewing it for another year. The only thing that's changing is the based on cost of service, the meter charge is going up to $215 from the $145. Otherwise, the transportation and the distribution charges on the system are still, the rates are still designed to cover the cost of their portion of those systems, and so there was nothing need to be changed at this point for them. But the meter charge, or like I said, the customer charge, it's not necessarily meter charge, but the base fixed charge customer charge is only $215, and they were fine with that. So.
Jeremy, on your board action form, you have a fiscal impact of approximately $5,000 per year. Is that the total of the dollar amount quantified by this agreement, or is that an impact over what we had last year, or how do you?
That's the additional increase based on basically the customer charge, yeah.
Okay.
All right, any other questions from the commission? Care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the 3M natural gas transportation daily swing supply agreement as presented.
I'll second.
There's a motion by Bob, Second by Monty. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Item 8F is the discussion on market prices and the financial impact with the severe weather. Chairman.
So I did give you a couple of sheets.
Talk about headlines, Jeremy. This is everywhere on the news.
I know it is. Yeah. I'll just touch on our impact. If you guys want to talk more about really what's going on and the metrics, I can sort of get into that. Depends on how much you guys want to talk about the topic. But I gave you two sheets. The first one is really our natural gas pricing structure here through February 21st. I had Dan put together the 10th to the 21st. Those are when the prices obviously started escalating up. You can see obviously over the President's Day, and if you guys recall 2 years ago, we had that same issue over the Christmas holiday where going into the weekend, we had to nom a certain amount of pack gas. But the problem with the markets is they don't settle till the following Monday, or in this case, the following Tuesday, because President's Day was a holiday. So on Friday when we left for the weekend, we were originally going to nom 13,500 units on our pipeline. You can see the breakdown of our contracted gas to our spot gas. We're typically 70 to 75% hedged with our contracts, but obviously with the increased volume of consumption, it ended up bringing us down to around 60% hedged. So about 40% of the gas volumes we had to buy came off of spot market pricing at the Ventura hub. And so when we left on the 12th, which was Friday, the prices were at $15. So we nommed 4,600, just under 4,700 MMBTUs through those 4 days. Of course, when we came back on Tuesday, you can see what the price settled at, $154.91. Typically, we're paying about, what we had been paying is about $3 an MMBTU. So you can see where the large increase is coming there. So over those 4 days, we spent just under $725,000 a day in natural gas purchases. And then when we thought it couldn't get any worse, we ended up nomming, we lowered our noms on the 17th to $36.80, and then the price jumped up to $188. Now the saving grace I will tell you is when I talked with utilities down south, they had prices settling at $800 to $1,100 in MMBTU. So a lot of these people are, they've spent their entire gas budget for 3 or 4 years in 4 days. I've heard the horror stories of we basically will deplete our cash reserves by 70%. They're all over the gamut as far as kind of where we're at. What we're estimating right now, obviously the month isn't done, we're estimating about $6 million worth of gas purchases for the month of February. About 3.3 million of that is our retail customers. The other 2.7 million is the contract customers, so 3M and TDK, HDI are the other 2.7 million. To put that in perspective, that 3.3 million on our retail side is basically our entire budget for the most part for the whole year. We have just under 3.5 million budgeted for retail, and we're estimating we're going to spend 3.3. So we're in the same boat as a lot of utilities where we're going to spend our entire budget for the month of February based on the pricing that's happened. Most of the hubs, Ventura hub, DMARC hub, and then the hub down in Texas, Louisiana, the Henry hub, they all significantly saw those big price spikes. The one hub that didn't was the Emerson hub, which is up by the Canadian border. So some of the local municipalities up there, Duluth, Perham, some of those northern utilities, their highest price point of gas, I think, hit $11, but they were virtually not impacted like the other major natural gas hubs. Now, a couple of the issues that have been happening, obviously on the natural gas side, it's basically a fairly unregulated industry, so there is no ceiling on price caps like there is on the electric side of things. Basically, yeah. They are talking about that. Obviously, there'll be huge pressure from the lobbyists and from the large gas industries to fight that piece. A couple of other things have been happening. A lot of the the natural gas wells down south froze up during that cold event down there. So one of the issues that they were having was they couldn't get gas to the production facilities because they couldn't pull it out of the ground. So with the lack of supply, that significantly escalated the pricing of things. The other piece that was happening on the electric side of things, with particularly in the ERCOT market in Oklahoma, was they couldn't generate. And a lot of people thought that was because things were frozen. And you know, they did have some ice and some cold things going on, some events down there that created an issue with a lot of their natural gas generation. But the big issue was they couldn't get supply of gas to those generators. So a lot of the generation in the ERCOT market didn't run. So they lost about 40 gigawatts of electric generation on natural gas and about 4 gigawatts of wind. They had some issues in certain parts of the country where they had a lot of ice, and that created havoc on the turbines, the wind turbines, and so they had to shut those things on and couldn't run those. Some other parts of the ERCOT market where they didn't have the ice storms, those turbines were running as anticipated. But obviously what's going around now is, you know, the concerns of overinflated natural gas markets. There's talk about people manipulating the markets, some of those things going on. I saw some of the news where the CFO of one of the major natural gas companies down south was basically bragging to the investors that they had this windfall of making billions of dollars now on the backs of just hearing that utilities are probably going to be going bankrupt, you know, in certain areas, and how our customers are going to pay. So that's getting out there, and so FERC and NERC they are starting inquiries. The PUC in Minnesota, they're also going to be looking more of a non-public inquiry on, you know, what are the impacts to the customers up here in Minnesota. I guess the one saving grace in Minnesota is we didn't have a major reliability issue like the last episode we had, where we had communities north of us had, you know, they were shut down, they couldn't get natural gas. So that was an important point by the investor-owned utilities, basically saying, yep, we understand we've got huge gas costs now, but we were reliable. People didn't go without heat, natural gas, they didn't go without electricity. So the MISO market was fairly insulated from a reliability standpoint. We didn't have a lot of rolling blackouts, rolling brownouts. The SPP market did. Some of the 3M facilities and some of those people, they had to shut off, you know, the balancing authorities, which is the SPP market. They basically would shut people off at 2 to 4 hour increments. So that was going on without any notice. So that's creating heartburn too, that these markets are able to just shut people off without proper notification. So that created problems in the SPP market, the ERCOT market. We were fairly good on the MISO market. We didn't have a lot of that, although it was getting to the next level, another level or two in the MISO market, and they would have probably started doing that. We didn't get called to do any of our generation. We were one level below where the load needed to be for them to call on our generation. So we were fairly insulated on the reliability side of things. The piece that we weren't insulated from, as most people weren't, was the market pricing on the natural gas side of things. The other piece that we were hoping to take advantage of is we saw on the electric side of things, the MISO market prices were significantly jumping up to $100, $200, $300 megawatts. So we started running a little bit, but Dan made a good call of saying, you know what, we just don't know what the prices are going to settle at next week. Let's not run our generation. Had we ran our generation to capture that $100 to $200 market, electric, on the electric side, we would end up paying in about $24,000 an hour to generate, because the prices sell at $154. So we would have been generating at about $1,200 and making $200. So he shut those things down after we ran about 48 hours. So even when you could generate to capture some, if you were running natural gas, you couldn't do it because the pricing of natural gas was so high. Some people that had nuclear and some coal and some fuel oil that could switch back to fuel oil, you know, they were able to capture some money on the markets. And ERCOT, they jumped up to their cap on the electric market at $9,000 a megawatt. Where they were able to, some people were able to capture those types of pricings out there. Obviously, we still have people out. But the impact to us is a significant, you know, natural gas cost to us. We typically run about $600,000 to $700,000 in gas purchases for the month of February. So you can see, you know, we're significantly larger than that. So we have been talking right now. They're going to try to get some. There's already. I sent you guys some letters from APPA, APGA. There's other associations that are looking to ask the federal government, the president, for some type of enactment of the Natural Gas Policy Act that would curtail the cap on what people can charge, and then also what's being talked about is there any type of refund or some way that some people can get retroly paid, because it doesn't do anything now to help out, because people are gonna have to pay these bills in the next week or two, that there needs to be, if there's something in consideration for some federal assistance or help, it needs to be retro back, because ultimately the customers are gonna vote, they're gonna bear the cost for the commodities that they consume. So those things are going on. PUC is talking about some of those things with their investor-owned utilities. They obviously know that we're not regulated by them. So we talked a little bit about that with some of the commissioners on the call the other day. But what I'm generally hearing from most utilities is they're going to look to try to find a way to spread out the cost impact to their customers over some length of time. So one of the things for you guys to think about, I haven't officially quantified the numbers. I have a pretty good estimate as far as where I think we might be with customers, but we won't know the exact numbers until the month finishes up with the final usage of gas and electricity. I can tell you an average retail customer or average residential customer, will probably see a 3 to 4 times their normal bill, if we don't do anything, which would be a significant increase to them on that. One of the thoughts I had for you guys to consider, some people are looking at it to put it out over 12 months, some maybe a little bit less depending on what they have for cash reserves. We have $650,000 in our rate stabilization fund. So I think we want to do the same thing we did 2 years ago, is we would draw that down to our minimum, $200,000. So that would take $400,000 off the bill. But we will have roughly about $2.9 million left that we'll need to capture back over some length of time. So my initial thought as I looked at this was trying to recapture that by the end of the year, over 10 months, so that we're matching up our revenues with our expenditures from a financial aspect. Because obviously we've got debt outstanding and we've got to keep a good rating, and if it looks like we're never going to collect those revenues, or it goes into different fiscal years, doesn't always look great with bond rating agencies. I guess we're in a position that we can float it. We've got cash balances to float those and recover that over time. Some of the smaller utilities don't have that, so they're going to immediately look for hopefully some type of relief from that. They're going to reach out to the state to see how they can be handled. I did hear from a couple of utilities this morning on the call that BP has reached out to some of the utilities and said, if you need us to spread out our bill to you, we're willing to entertain certain things, provide us what you're looking at, and they'll run it up the flagpole to their higher ups within BP, which is predominantly where most of our gas comes from in this area from BP. I did hear BP said they would look to restructure one utility's contracts, add a little bit more under their contracts and spread it out that way, so defraying some of the costs out. I talked with John this morning. They haven't contacted us. They may think we're in a good enough position that we don't maybe need that help from BP to defray those costs. They may reach out to them at some juncture, but we typically get our bills by the 10th of March, or the 10th of the month, and we typically have to pay by the 20th, and so obviously we'll have about $6 million going out here by the 3rd week of March. Obviously a big portion that will be collected back through the contract customers. They're about 45% roughly of that usage. But for you guys, the retail customers, particularly the residential and the commercial, if you've got some general thoughts, you can certainly talk about that. The $400,000 rate stabilization fund helped a lot more last time because we only had about $1 million kind of overrun on our costs, so we pulled $400,000 out and then only had to collect back a $600,000. We did that over the 1 month, and that was fairly manageable, but $600,000 to collect back versus 2.9 is a whole different number, and we probably do want to spread it out over some length of time.
So with
consideration,
balancing a couple big fundamental things, in my opinion, is one, we need to be prepared with a solution and an answer, both from management and supported by a decision from the commission. So I think we have to task Jeremy with starting on something. But then balance that with the fact that this whole thing is still really new and fresh, and there's a whole bunch of legislative conversations going on. There might be some relief or programs provided. Is where I'm at in my head right now. How do we move this forward in having a plan in place that we can implement, knowing that we need to balance that with potentially legislative help? So I think we got to task Jeremy with come up with a plan, and I don't disagree with see what it looks like on the impact to consumers over the next 10 months. It's kind of a place to start in my mind.
Right, I thought too, I'll have a better idea next week. One of the things I propose is maybe having a workshop or getting together with you guys next week. If you guys have some time, I'll have better numbers that we can look at and kind of see what the impact potentially would be, or more concrete impact. Obviously, we'll obviously have to send some press release out or put something out, just letting people know that there will be months, if we want to extend this through the summer, that you're going to have higher natural gas bills than you typically would, because the utilities is cash flowing it up front and we're collecting it back over time.
When do these bills go out?
These bills typically will go out the first week of March. So I talked with Sue and I said, we may need to push back sending the bills out until we meet with you guys and just kind of go through what a more concrete impact is. And really what that will do is it'll push us sending the bills out probably to the second week of March, with then collection probably by the end of March, which will be, you know, a month or a week after we pay our bill, but we're not gonna be able to recover that entire cost in 1 month anyway. So you guys want to be comfortable cash flowing that amount over a period of time, and I'll have those numbers that you can look at.
I'm way more comfortable having the utilities cash flow that amount than I am asking the individual coming out of a pandemic to cash flow that amount.
Absolutely. Any issues with bond covenants that you're concerned about?
No, the only issue that I'm typically concerned about is, again, just if we're looking to collect this back over multiple years, that to me typically is always kind of a red flag. So that's why I talked with the utilities this morning on the call. I typically lean towards collecting all back in the same fiscal year. Because then again, you're matching up the expenses for the year versus your revenues. You have a more complete picture, and then it shows the bond rating agencies that you're collecting your revenues, even under extreme circumstances, in a fairly reasonable time frame. That they're less concerned about you saying, "Oh, we'll collect them back at some juncture on that piece."
And then by doing it that way, it's called bad debt if they're not paid, rather than something else off balance sheet. So that's my knee-jerk reaction based on today's conversation. Is I would ask, and the commission can agree or disagree, but I'd ask you to start thinking about running the modeling for repayment of it all in fiscal year 21.
Yeah, and to dovetail off what Anthony said, he made some good points. To also think about, there's stuff that we don't know. There's pending legislation that we don't know what that looks like. It's not going to be just for Texas and Oklahoma.
Clearly, we got an issue too here.
Correct.
Absolutely, and everybody does. Also, I'm going to look at the city on this one too. There may be another stimulus package that comes out. If the city was eligible for stimulus dollars, I'm not shy at all about asking about some help with that too from the city. If those funds are eligible for something like that, I think that's fair.
And then the third thing, which I'm going to talk about after we get off of this, but dovetails back, we got some MRES dollars that we still should have, in my opinion, probably an unfinished business line item next month to discuss.
Right. So there are a couple things on that too.
In hindsight.
I did also hear, speaking of MRES, in their February report, they ended up getting a $13 million settlement on being overcharged transmission costs that went to FERC, and the parties where they overcharged MRES, which were several IOUs and some co-ops, are challenging it. So they anticipate sending out a letter by the end of February on a refund or a credit back to their membership. I don't know, there wasn't any more details in what market that was happening in, if it was in the SPP market with their member, or the MISO market, which would include us, or if there's $13 million that's going back and being divvied out. So I don't know what that impact is, but there may be some collection of overcharged transmissions through the settlement with MRES as well. So once I hear about that, I'll let you know on that piece. The other piece, the other sheet that I didn't touch on, because it's an impact, but it's a small impact relative to the gas side, is we also are gonna get hit on the electric side of things, because obviously we couldn't generate because the natural gas prices were too high. But you'll see our typical, our February from last year through the 21st, we spent about $55,000 in market purchases, and we're typically in that $40,000 to $50,000 range for the amount of excess power that we're buying above and beyond our baseload contract. You can already see this month through the 21st, we've already spent $327,000. So we've got, already through the 21st, an additional $270,000 in electric purchases that we typically don't have. Now, we did kind of model a little bit of that, and it looks like that would add about a penny, the power cost adjustment. So it's not, we've had those size of power cost adjustments before, but I don't know what the entire costs of power are yet until the end of the month. But I think it's important for you guys to know there was also an impact on the electric side that paralleled the natural gas prices. And so that's been a big point of contention and conversation in these meetings, as well as talking about trying to parallel the natural gas industry with the electric industry a little bit more, that when you have one that's regulated, one that's unregulated, you impact the electric side of the grid and the markets from their inability to generate load to keep the lights on when you're pricing people out of being able to generate. So when the market's calling you to generate and you tell them you don't want to generate because it's costing us money, there needs to be a way to recover and recapture some of that stuff. So that was brought up a lot about making sure that these two are somewhat in synchronization in extreme weather events where you've got price volatility, that you're taking into consideration the other commodity market that is important to, for those things happening. So, because without the electricity, what was happening down south is water plants weren't working, their pipes were freezing, people were having to boil water, and it was all because they couldn't get, one, they couldn't get the supply, and two, if there was supply, they weren't generating because it was costing them money. And the ERCOT market doesn't have cost mechanisms built in to recover some of that stuff, and so they weren't running. So that caused problems with wastewater facilities and water treatment facilities and all sorts of things.
So until there's some kind of regulation in place on the gas side of things, maybe we need to consider increasing our rate stabilization fund.
Jared and I did talk about that. That may be something we'll have to look at as well.
I mean, this is a pretty high fluctuation. We've seen it twice in 2 years, and it got a heck of a lot worse this time around.
Yeah, if we think this is something that's going to continue to increase in frequency, or once a year hit us, or even every other year, or every third year, I think it's something we got to consider.
So I am also in favor of spreading it out through the rest of the year.
Absolutely.
We're in a position to do that, and to expect the ratepayers to try to stomach it in one lump right away is, I think it's unreasonable.
We should go into it with our eyes open if we take that approach, that by the end of the year our what's the right word that I'm looking for? Bad debt expense is likely going to substantially increase.
Yep.
I wouldn't be afraid to maybe reach out to BP and see what the terms would be if they're going to allow some kind of a different payment structure. If we can take advantage of that and it's not cost prohibitive, I would say it's worth the ask.
Yeah, I agree.
Jeremy, have you been hit up for any kind of news or anything like that?
I have not yet.
Okay.
I have listed some horror stories today, and I'm very cognizant about putting out media releases or press releases until I have the facts. Some people didn't do that and they got caught with misinformation, and now they have to rebuttal and they have to do that stuff. So I've tried to warn people through like years of learning the hard way sometimes that you can't control always what the media sends out there. So make sure you're very factual and succinct with what you're releasing, because if not, that gets out there. Now I am hearing a lot of, we've already started getting calls about, hey, how big, is our bill going to double, triple? There's also stuff going out already now with the investor-owned utilities. In their processes, when they come up with their customer impact, what they do is they submit reporting and filing to the PUC for true-ups, and then that will start in September. True up for the next calendar year, because what they do is they provide 12-month forecasted customer bills to the PUC that gets reviewed, and they say, yep, that sounds good. But if there's any adjustment significantly from their forecasted customer impacts, then they have to report that and then they can start collecting that back over September. So what we're hearing, I haven't heard it so much in my community, but a lot of other municipal communities are already hearing that is, well, if the investor owns aren't allowing you to, aren't looking to start collecting back until September, why are you? So the municipal utilities that are hearing that are the ones that are surrounded by investor-owned utilities, you know, Pine City and some of those ones that are around Center Point and Excel. But that's the process that investor-owned utilities go through, is they don't start the true-up until September, just like on the transmission side, the true-ups start in June, they do the re-true-ups. But they all did say in their cryptic messages, if the PUC is willing to extend that, essentially, if you would allow us to start collecting sooner than later, we can spread out that true-up over a longer period of time. So the PUC said they would take that into consideration, and they'll talk about those things. Obviously, the PUC would have to take some formal action to allow a deviation from their true-up process that they're doing now. But I would anticipate as that stuff gets out in the media more, in the newspapers with Center Point and Excel, I may get some calls here, you guys may hear, hey, you know, what's HUC doing? I hear Excel customers aren't having to start paying back until September, that you'll want to respond. We're actually more nimble, we can start truing up sooner, but that's the process that they're currently under, but that could change under these circumstances as well.
I think the avenue that you proposed, in my view, is more lenient. Yes, you start sooner, but you're recovering it over a longer period of time, which is more favorable to the consumer. So I think with the way that we're set up, I'm completely in favor of that route.
I got a positive for you.
Good, we need one.
I know.
I do. I actually had conversations last week with snowbirds down in this very southwest and very southeast of the U.S. And they were both incredibly complimentary of what they have here. The fact that they don't have to worry about the reliability. They knew their homes were going to be heated. They knew they weren't going to have pipe busted. They knew they were going to have electricity. And a lot of their neighbors that are in the same boat didn't have that luxury. And that's people from all over the U.S. and Canada. You know, they're, pardon my French, but they're crapping their pants because they're sitting in Florida or they're sitting in California and they have no idea what's going on at home and they can't control it. But we have people in Hutch that were confident for good reason. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that goes back to the entire staff here. So that was really good to hear. The other thing is, Mark, I guess, I know you're council, but you're still related to the city, is I would hope that this would be some kind of either council discussion, agenda item, something. Because I think that people do need to sit back and recognize and appreciate what they have.
Yeah.
If you pass that along or ask that question or something.
About it.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see the, vast majority of our ratepayers are residential. You read the headlines and watch the news, and it was Texas, they lost their power and their pipes were freezing. And their bills are gonna be high. And if the residential ratepayers can correlate that to that their bills are gonna go up, even though they didn't lose power and gas, we might need to be prepared to provide some education of however you would translate everything that Jeremy knows about the situation and utilities to the average ratepayer. I'd challenge you might have to be prepared to have something ready for that.
Yeah.
Not positive, but they're gonna say, I thought that was a Texas problem, why do my bills go up?
Right.
That's exactly what's
So,
going on.
I think so, not positive.
We'll need to meet next week, I'm guessing, is what the plan should be.
Yeah, I think if you guys have the ability to get together for an hour sometime.
I'm gone Monday, back in the office Tuesday, so Wednesday or later next week would work for me. And I'll be a little bit out of touch, so the text message would be the best way to get a hold of me.
I'll send out a text.
Thank you.
So Angie, you'll coordinate that?
I will. I'll send you guys an email and text.
I don't bother you with my issues right now.
Yeah, I'd say for sure Wednesday at the earliest, 'cause we won't be able to pull the reads until, so we'll pull them in on Monday for the full month of February, so it'll take me a day and a half.
The later in the week, the better, as far as I'm concerned, but we have to
That'd be
balance
great.
that with you having to make a decision on how you're gonna bill for February, right?
Yeah, I would say Wednesday, Wednesday or Thursday, one of those 2 days if it works for you guys. As long as I give Sue a heads up that we need to let our company that we know that we use to do the billing, when we send the file that we're not gonna have it ready to go, we're gonna push it back, then they'll know that. So if Wednesday or Thursday works for you guys in the morning or whenever, that should work fine.
Okay.
Thursday morning would be my preference. Anytime.
Yeah, to be early as possible for me.
So 7?
We can do it
5.
before, yeah. I should be able to get you something before the meeting too, by that time, by Thursday.
I'll see if 7 a.m. Thursday works for all of you.
Thanks, Angie.
Yeah.
All right, then, item 9. Do you care to make a motion to adjourn?
Let's peel back before I get to the
Oh,
adjournment.
I'm sorry.
Just a couple thoughts for you guys, maybe as standing agenda items until they get finished. Under unfinished business going forward, could we, and correct me if I'm wrong, but should we have the governor's salary cap conversation as a standing item so that it doesn't get away from us to the back half of 21? I feel like we need to stay on top of it and address it the middle half of the year, or at least be aware of it as a general conversation.
Yes, yes. To clarify, is what's going on at the legislature?
Legislature, and you know it's going to be an issue again probably in December of 21 at the next review, just to keep it generally aware and on the middle burner. And then the second conversation, same point, just to keep it aware about the MRES money and how we're going to plan to utilize that, because right now it's just sitting in the checking account. Is that correct, Jeremy?
Correct. I think a couple things, the MRS refund, the solar project, and then the gas bill. And that's a lot of, I mean, you guys approved the solar, but there's quite a few big things there. I mean, I'll provide you some stuff too that you can.
In my mind, that unfinished business is something that we should have on our middle burner, but maybe a decision won't be made at that particular meeting. That's how I think about it. Maybe that's not the correct way to think about the unfinished business agenda item, but that's what I have in my mind. What happened last year with the GM review and the governor's salary cap was it just kind of slipped through the cracks, and then all of a sudden it became an issue the last couple of months at 20, last few months at 20. And I think we should stay in front of it a little bit more than that.
So I guess my only question there is, are we reevaluating whether we're willing to go above it, or are you looking just to monitor it?
Monitor, stay on top of it.
Status at the state level?
Yep. What's going on with it? I wouldn't put it as an agenda item to say should we go above it or not go, or stay below it, or pressure for anything, but more of just keep it on the agenda item so it stays front of mind as a whole picture, knowing that it's going to be another conversation piece at the end of 21. That's my only objective with having it on there.
Okay.
Well, I think we'll know if there's any action taken by May 1st. You know, after the adjourn down in St. Paul, we'll have an answer on that.
Yeah, correct.
No.
Is that appropriate agenda item to have under unfinished
Budget
business?
year.
What'd you say, Bob?
It's a budget year, I believe,
Budget
down
year.
there. So that takes up a lot of their time.
Yeah.
I don't think they balanced their budgets.
Especially when you have a hole to fill.
It's debatable some years.
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are the two that I had that I thought maybe should fall under unfinished business just to keep them on our radar. And then all this MRES rebate dollar or what we're going to do with it kind of heats up again with the gas costs.
Fine by me?
Thank you, guys.
Anything else?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion by Don, second by Anthony to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All
Any
right.
opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.